Hey everybody, it's P.J. Turner, executive producer and host of the Break It Down show. Today's guest is a guy named Brad Johnson, who was the station chief for the CIA, and that means that this is a spy versus spy show. What's cool about this one is we get a chance to examine some real life scenarios. Specifically, we talk about the Hillary Clinton email situation and the whataboutism and how that's kind of not a very good way to represent that. Dianne Feinstein's Chinese chief of staff / limo driver, as well as how we investigate all of these things, whether it's impeachment with the president or Joe Biden and his son. So we get into a lot of those things. Brad has an organization called Americans for Intelligence Reform. He is the president of it, and you can find more about it at intelreform.org. And their idea is that a strong and effective CIA is actually absolutely fundamental to U.S. national security and safety for our citizens. You're going to love this episode. It pushes some buttons, so be ready. You're going to learn some things about how field operators operate and how the guys that guide them also operate. Standard things apply. Rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends. Maybe buy a shirt. I'm going to put new shirts out probably this week. If not, it'll be early next week. It's a good way to support us and help me buy some gear and potentially put John and I on the road to go and do some recording in maybe Tennessee. We'll see how that goes. As always, I encourage you to support SaveTheBrave.org. That is my home charity. That is where my charitable heart and effort goes. And I'll just tell you right now, when you have doubts like who do I donate to, you can donate to Save the Brave. We will put the money to work and we will help save lives. If that matters to you, if that's part of your personal charitable charter, then by all means, do that. Hey, wherever you're out there, have a great holiday season. Whatever holiday you celebrate in whatever country you're in, I just think it's great that this is the time of year we all sort of slow down, recognize one another regardless of anything else, and just say, have a happy holiday, have a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Festivus. It's all of these things that make us who we are and unite us as people. This is going to be a great show. You're going to love it. Here's Brad Johnson.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Morata.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Brad Johnson, president of Americans for Intelligence Reform, intelreform.org, and you're listening to the Break It Down show.
Spy versus spy style. Here we go. I got Brad on the show with me. And you know I like to try to take the reality of folks that collect information and bring it to you, because it turns out there's not always a mole at the very top of the CIA or the top of Army Intel. It's usually much more complex than that. But let's look into Brad and what he does. And so, Brad, if you would, just kind of give us a basic bio on, look, I mean, being an office chief overseas is an incredibly sexy job on paper. Let's talk about some of that. But just give us a kind of a basic background and then we'll dive in. Hey, this is P.J. Turner from the Break It Down show, checking in real quick to ask you this. John, Scott, and I all support Save the Brave with our time, our location, our effort, and our money. Each month we give a small amount. Do the same with us. Go to SaveTheBrave.org. Click on the donate tab, pick an amount that you want to come out each month, and they will handle all the rest. I stand behind these folks. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the show. But just give us a kind of a basic background, and then we'll dive in.
Okay, sounds good. My background was intelligence operations at the CIA, which is your overseas cadre that runs the espionage arm of things. And so I spent, out of a 25-year career, about almost 20 years of it overseas. So I tried to avoid the headquarters duty as much as possible. We're preferring to be out in the field. And for field cadre, basically a chief of station, which is the head of a CIA office overseas, and is equivalent of, I guess, the captain of a ship for Navy. CIA is actually largely built on Navy traditions rather than Army, even though it was OSS was led by the Army. So a lot of the powers were actually built on ships captains' authorities. So that was my background. I was out multiple times as a chief of station, and as I said, most of my career was overseas.
When you're a chief of station, are you in the field collecting, or are you just running the day-to-day operations of the office?
Well, all of the above. Things have changed a lot in the last few years, particularly under former director of the CIA, John Brennan, where he did what he called modernization. But essentially, what he did was dissolve the operations division, the operations cadre, and created sort of a one size fits all, everybody does everything sort of methodology. So he bragged about this on NPR that what we've done is turn to our overseas partners and in partnership with them, try to accomplish the things that we need to do rather than doing the traditional espionage role of finding people that tell secrets, if you will, the spies, what we would call the spies, who are reporting information secretly to the United States and the United States only. So in that role, my role, certainly you're always doing things because there's always a certain level of cooperation with these liaison services with whom you deal, our overseas partners, if you will. So there's always operations of overseas with different countries and organizations has always been robust and has always been important. In fact, we just saw that where we just had the recent success in getting Baghdadi. That was done in large part through a liaison relationship, a partnership, overseas foreign partnership with the Kurdish intelligence service. So it can and has succeeded and will continue to succeed in many ways. I guess my gripe, and one of the reasons for the founding of this organization, was because of the disillusion of the operations cadre that runs espionage. And what's done today is really no longer espionage. And again, that was something that John Brennan bragged about, although others have now tried to dissimulate and cover up for that. He did away with that. And the training and the capability, I mean, this is a highly, highly specialized field of endeavor. And OSS learned a lot of those lessons through literally blood, sweat, and tears. A lot of people died along that way, learning the lessons that had to be learned. And then that was all turned over to the CIA, and many of the personnel came over from OSS to you could certainly say it's a continuation. CIA is a continuation of OSS. And a lot of those people came over, and the training and lessons learned were all built upon over the next decades, all of which was just flushed down the toilet and spit on by John Brennan, who just shows his incompetence and lack of understanding and ability to prioritize was demonstrated by this modernization program that he did. Now, some good came out of the modernization program in the technical fields and so on, but everything was overwhelmed by the stupidity of having done away with operations cadre.
Whew, man, that is a lot. When folks like Brennan come in and they run the organization, they know how to run organizations. I think Leon Panetta, didn't he run the CIA for a while too?
Yes.
I mean, how does he compare with someone like Brennan? Leon's not a collector. He wasn't from the IC in general. Does he compare favorably?
Well, he's of the same ilk. You essentially, we're kind of getting into the philosophical realms with some of this, but essentially people who are leftist in philosophy, the Democrats today are very leftist in their philosophy, but socialists here in the United States have always been anti-espionage. And so it's always been something that they've undertaken to sort of damage or do in without recognition of just how precisely important that is in the scheme of things for national security. You take away our information and you're so badly damaging us by the risk that's out there. If we had a well-organized, fully robust intelligence collection program, I think it's realistic to suspect that we could have stopped 9/11, for example, where we were making more active efforts to penetrate all of these organizations that are enemies of the United States. So if you look back in history, after the fall of the wall and where the Soviet Union essentially disintegrated, there were congressmen, Democrats, of course, who called for the dissolution of the CIA. So it's always been something they've sort of been after, and it's specific to the espionage end of things. They just don't like it philosophically, where the conservatives and generally the Republicans, but more kind of the conservatives and the national security people tended to just be more readily understanding of the need for good espionage because of the value of the information it provides that impacts U.S. national security. So it's just one of those things that's kind of a philosophical thing. So former leaders that were picked by Republican presidents tended to do a better job, and the ones picked by the Democratic presidents tended to do a poorer job because of their philosophical commitment. And for example, Jimmy Carter probably was the one when it was Stansfield Turner at the time, who was his director of the CIA, probably did the most to really kind of undermine the capabilities of the CIA. And he did a riff. It was known as a Black Thursday because it took place on that day, which is the end of the pay period in federal government. And he let go a couple thousand people, just sent them out the door. A riff is a reduction in force in government terms. Next day, a roughly equal number of people walked out the door and just said, screw this, and left, and they could all retire. So under President Reagan, that was attempted to be recovered and rebuilt, and there was a substantial rekindling of capability at the CIA. But then under Clinton, that again was turned around, and you started to see all this separation where the FBI and CIA weren't allowed to communicate. And I would argue that as a result, we see these problems like 9/11. And that has never really been repaired. And it was finally just done away with. The capabilities of the CIA were just horrendously damaged under specifically the former President Obama and at the hand of John Brennan, former Director John Brennan, who admitted that he had voted for the Communist Party previously and was apparently very friendly to the ideas of Islamic extremism and Islamists, and himself is supposed to be a Muslim. So you just had a kind of an unfriendly audience in charge of intelligence, and it's just that it's something that's been repeated and repeated and repeated, at least in modern history.
How often do you need that recalibration, though? I mean, because look, if we're going to be critical of conservatives, they'll take it too far in their direction, whether they're too hawkish or they're, we complain a lot about the Russians meddling in our elections, but you and I both know, like we love to meddle in other people's elections. Like we love to talk about it openly in the newspaper. So, but we don't like what happens to us. So what do we need that recalibration back towards a more suspicious, a more left-leaning leader to kind of force the agency not to hobble it, because we don't really want to do that, but we kind of do.
Well, a couple things on all of that. I mean, you actually touched on a lot of very interesting and important points. First of all, the people interfering in our elections and us interfering in others' elections. Quite common. It's a normal thing, I would say, in fact, and that goes on in the world. And different countries would like to see different governments come to power in other countries and neighboring countries. And certainly the Obama administration was very active in that. President Obama traveled to Israel and took money and was actively supporting one party over another party. He was very, very active in his dislike for the Netanyahu and him being the prime minister of Israel. So, I mean, it very active, very open. There was no secrets. It was discussed in the press openly. But say Russia coming in and interfering with our elections, or China coming in, or Cuba, much smaller country, but nevertheless very active. They all have always done that. Following World War II, everybody's been doing it all this time. And there's many defectors that have come out through the years and written books about it. You can go back and look and see what they've done. They've all been very active trying to find people that would support their perspective in the press. And they've been active at that for, the last 70, 80 years. So they've had a lot of successes. And so we see a lot of what I would consider enemy propaganda be, picked up and used and printed or reported on in the U.S. press. It's quite common. So they're doing influence, but now this has all changed and we've kind of come to a new page. What happened is the United States legalized and codified actually legally interfering with U.S. elections and U.S. policy, the formation of U.S. policy. That's why when I saw the original report that Russia had supposedly interfered with U.S. elections and had somehow been cooperating with Trump and the Trump campaign, I knew that was all false instantly. and very easy to know for anyone who has, well, kind of understands the situation. You would instantly know that it was all completely made up. The reason is how this system got codified. It's called lobbying. It is perfectly legal for Russia to spend millions of dollars a month, which they do here in the United States, to pursue policies that are in their interest, which they do. So does China, and so does any other country in the world that has enough money to do that. And millions of dollars are spent here in the Washington, D.C. area on K Street getting these lobbyists to try and influence policy. So it's been legalized. So why on earth would Russia ever try to recruit somebody in the Trump campaign, and something that would be difficult to control, difficult to keep secret, be extraordinarily expensive, when it's far cheaper just to do it legally through a lobbyist? So it just made no sense from the very get-go. So, I mean, I would say our problem today is that we've legalized it. And China and Russia and India and whoever wants to is taking full advantage of it. So if you want to address that issue, there's the place. And, to everybody here in D.C. knows it, everybody in the Capitol, Senate, and Congress, they all know that that's the case, but yet it doesn't get talked about publicly. So it's just one of those little quirks of the Washington, D.C. establishment.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the things that are important in terms of these big decisions, seating a Supreme Court justice, that became a political, partisan shit show where nobody got what they want. We didn't get to understand who Brett Kavanaugh was, if he should or shouldn't be a justice. We got to see people grandstanding on the stage instead of focusing on, the very important task of giving someone a lifetime seat on one of the three branches of our government. And it's, now we have this impeachment thing. And right or wrong, if the president did something wrong, let's do it. Let's openly hear it. Let's have the case out, call witnesses, let him stand in front of his accusers, call witnesses, and let's get through it and see what the evidence is. But look, as a fellow collector, as a guy who's gone out and done things, I don't see evidence that I would be confident. I don't have all the reports and everything, but I don't see evidence there that this has actually happened. I understand folks that are upset about it and don't want quid pro quo, but are we now torpedoing the entire election because of a partisan thing? Trying to do that, because if the president has to go down, then doesn't also Joe Biden have to go down? And then isn't that the president's job? Like if someone's using their political office to gather favor with another, personal favor with another government, there's a real problem there. I would like to know the answers to both of these things, I suppose.
I think it's actually fairly straightforward. I don't find anything to be too tricky. It's misreported and manipulated purposefully for political goals. But if you just sit back and look at the actual facts, you have Hunter Biden, who is a drug addict, emotionally very unstable. Just, for example, his brother dies, he divorces his wife, marries his brother's widow, divorces her, and marries some girl, divorces her, then marries some other girl he just barely met. So you've got this emotionally unstable former drug addict who has zero experience in the energy industry and suddenly gets hired to be on the board to the tune of $83,000 a month. Now, they're not going to do that out of their goodness of their heart. They're doing it for a reason. And we know that for sure some of that reason included access to the vice president, because we've seen the photographs being reported where the two top executives at this energy company, Hunter and Joe Biden, were all playing golf together. So we know those conversations took place. Then the other half of that, suddenly Joe Biden goes to Ukraine and tells Ukraine, fire this prosecutor that's investigating the company where my son gets paid $83,000 a month, or we're withholding this aid. So, I mean, that's all facts that all of them have admitted to. There is zero question in there of interpretation. It's Hunter Biden has talked about all of these facts. The photographs have come up of the meetings. Joe Biden himself talked about insisting that prosecutor be fired and that he was the one investigating the company where his son worked. So all of that is basic facts. So President Trump is responsible to go after corruption, especially at that level, and just so blatantly corrupt. So he was absolutely within his duty to have done that. Now, but I don't think that's the essence of what we see happening with this Eric Ciaramella guy. I think that what happened with him is not so much to target President Trump, although that's a secondary goal and kind of cream on the side, if you will, to let them kind of bring up this same sort of argument that, oh, yeah, Trump is corrupt. They tried the quid pro quo, got rid of that, and now they're calling it corruption, I think, is the term that's now it. And each time they just try something new to see what sticks, and when nothing sticks, they move on to the next one. But if you look at Eric Ciaramella, he was somebody that in college was a protester, speaks Arabic, very pro Islamic radicals, and was at a demonstration in the streets supporting a radical professor who was, a Islamic extremist. He got picked up then by the CIA and was just skyrocketed to the top with John Brennan. Brennan then, with the Obama administration, put him at the National Security Council, which is the White House. And he, for a while, was an analyst working on Ukraine-Russia issues, and so had some background in Ukraine, so kind of just evolved into being this Ukraine expert. Now, he was on these trips with Joe Biden. He was at the meetings here that Joe Biden had in Washington, D.C. with the Ukrainian people. So he was involved in all of this all the way along, which, talk about irony. Joe Biden's son gets the payoff, which it looks like that. Joe Biden, does the deed and gets this guy fired. And this Ciaramella doesn't look at that as something he needs to report. But Trump asks to have this clearly questionable act investigated, and that's what he reports as a whistleblower. I mean, the irony of that is just astounding. So this guy is connected back into that, formerly worked for Joe Biden, formerly worked for the Obama White House, close associate of John Brennan. And all of this stuff always seems to lead back to John Brennan. All of the stuff that we saw overseas with the Italians being involved with putting this case together that was used to get the FISA warrant, all of these connections. Every time something new comes up, there's always a connection to John Brennan. So my personal theory on it is that when all this comes out, when all of it surfaces, a lot of the roads are going to just simply lead back to John Brennan as having been the spider at the center of the web.
Okay. Man, so many things to ask about. Let me just start with some real ground truth basic stuff. As a station boss, one of your clandestine operators comes up and says, "I've got a source who basically, and we'll use the whistleblower as a source, but he describes this person to you in a dossier form like they didn't hear directly what they said, but there could be something here. This person seems like they've got exploitable information." Is that, for me, if I'm running a CI team on my end, I'm like, can we find somebody better? Can you cooperate? I want to triangulate the information I've got.
There's no question whatsoever. Okay. I mean, and this whistleblower information had precisely that done to it. It was moved up the chain, if you will, chain of command, and was turned over to DOJ. DOJ took a look at it and go, what the heck is this? This is useless. And so nothing went forward from that point. And that is when the information came out that Schiff, who's running the committee doing the investigation, Adam Schiff, was coordinating with Ciaramella. And once that surfaced, that's when Ciaramella kind of disappeared. But once Adam Schiff saw that this was going nowhere, stepped in, coordinated directly with the so-called whistleblower, and that's how it all took off and became public. Now, and then Adam Schiff was initially saying, this guy has to come testify. We're going to put him out here in front of everybody. Once the news surfaced that he had previously coordinated with Eric Ciaramella, then that ended. Then he didn't want that, apparently, to come out. And so now this guy has to be protected at all costs, et cetera, et cetera. Even though his name has been bandied about for weeks, everybody knows who it is. A lot of the mainstream media, they mention his name, but they hesitate to confirm it was him. Even though it's been confirmed by many, many other sources and reported on by lots of other people, they're still hesitant.
Okay, so, and I'm not a political guy, but these are the things that bug me because people like us have to go out and dig through what these things are in real time and in situations that are extremely dangerous, quite often to everybody involved. So let me back up real quick. It seems like we can't get a straightforward investigation on anybody working at the very top of the federal government. And I'm pointing my finger right now squarely at Secretary Clinton. because, look, this is what I understand about top secret SCI. It doesn't belong on a server outside of a closed network. That's very specific. Everybody knows the rules. And one of the fail safes is that if you don't know the rules, you're still guilty. So when you come forward and you say, I didn't care for this information, I admit it and I take responsibility, and then there's no conviction of anybody. How do I take any of those folks, regardless of party, how do I take any of them seriously?
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's a fabulous and extremely important point. And let's go back and look at some of the basic facts on this one. Former FBI Director Comey came out with his famous speech in July of 2016. And in that speech, that was where he said, oh, yeah, Hillary Clinton did this, this, and this, was extremely careless in her handling of classified documents, but no prosecutor in the United States would go after her on this case. It's just not worth doing. There was no intent, blah, blah, blah. Well, a couple of things. One, first of all, when Comey started talking about Clinton's intent, which is precisely the point that you made, intent is not required. You either have it at home or you do not.
Right.
If you have it at home, you are guilty. Even if it was an accident, you are guilty. So that once Comey said that, he's lying. Right. Because he knows that. He was director of the FBI. He's fully familiar with all of those things. So now the other part of it, one of the things Comey said there was,
hey, this is P.A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
Now, the other part of it, one of the things Comey said there was, he said there were numbers of strings of communication containing classified document, and he made a comment like there were 12 or 15 of them, each containing several hundred classified documents. So you kind of just guesstimate, and you're probably talking between 2,500, 3,000 classified documents. Now, I got to say that's a lot of classified documents to have released essentially out into the public. Now, the FBI then did an IG, an Inspector General report, looking at all of this. They went to the FBI agent who was investigating the computer, the laptop computer that was Anthony Weiner's that contained all these classified documents. That guy reported to the FBI IG that James Comey had misled the American people and was off by the number of classified documents by a factor of 10.
Wow.
That means we're no longer talking about 2,500 or 3,000. We're talking about 25,000 or 30,000 classified documents. I mean, that is just absolutely, completely out of control. One more step to this. There was that computer then was sent to Quantico, which is where the FBI does its forensic work, and a second IG report was done. The second IG report reconfirmed what was mentioned in the first IG report, that there was a second area of memory that had not been exploited that appeared to contain an equal number of documents. So some portion of which would then be classified. So we don't know. There would probably be some overlap of documents within these two memories. But now we're probably talking, maybe as many as 60 or 70,000 classified documents. Now, say one classified document has gotten lots of people in trouble. There's people doing jail time over one classified document. And so we're looking at perhaps as many as 70,000 classified documents, possibly more, that the Hillary Clinton team, because to do that, it takes a team. It's not something one person would just do, especially somebody like Hillary Clinton, who was A, busy, and C, or B, doesn't know that much about this sort of thing. So, 70,000 documents are out there. Nothing is done whatsoever. State Department about 2 weeks ago came out with their IG report that basically said, well, there were 31 security violations which have been adjudicated just as governmentese for, whoever was supposed to get punished for a violation got punished, meaning they got a letter in their file or whatever. Those are the sorts of things that could happen. Nobody was fired, or they would have reported that. So there was some sort of administrative action taken against whoever was held responsible for those 31 security violations, which is essentially a few slaps on the wrist and nothing happened for 70,000, perhaps 70,000 classified documents. And one final thing on that, and I'll let it rest a bit, but the way that has to be done, it's a closed system, precisely as you said. So on a classified computer system, you have the computer screen and your keyboard. You're not able to put a thumb drive in there and make copies of everything, share to another computer that's not on the classified system. There's no way to connect up. So the way that you get these documents off is to print them. Everybody can print. And those are all carefully kept track of. So all of those documents that were printed off, the government knows who printed them off, exactly the moment when they did it, whose computer, who authorized it. All of those things are of record, clear record. And those records are still there. So we know who did it, but that's not followed up on. State Department says there's no problem there. There's no there there. And so you print that off. Now, one of the things that Hillary Clinton has made a big deal out of saying was, well, they weren't marked classified at the time. That's all correct. So what happened? When you print off a classified document, it has a header and a footer. Both the header and the footer give the classification of the document. So somebody had to cut those off, scan it, and put it into an unclassified system, and then start emailing them out. And I would say that this is what James Comey said in that July 2016 speech, that all this was done to make things easy for Hillary Clinton. So I would say that pretty clearly what has happened is her team set about to do all of this, and they would cut off the header and footer, scan the document, and then they would send it out to her BlackBerry, which is many, many photographs of her flipping through her BlackBerry looking at things. But no one has ever looked at the damage, done a damage assessment. We don't even know the number of classified documents that were out there. Were there 70,000? Was it 150,000? Was it 30,000? Nobody knows, as far as I know, how many documents are actually out there.
Let me speak to the audience for a minute and kind of give them some context on some of this. So look, top secret information is processed in a specific facility. On occasion, it can happen somewhere else, but if you're going to be working day to day, you go into a thing called a SCIF. And SCIF stands for really top secret shit happens here. If someone walks into that building, they don't just walk directly into the SCIF. They walk into a secure checkpoint. You sign in. You surrender your phone. If you've never been there before, they likely make you read a form to say, you understand, you're walking into an area where they're processing TS, SCI, and you can't, SCI means special compartment information. So you can't even get that information unless you have specific permission. So there's all these layers because it turns out we know how to protect top secret if everybody plays by the rules. And so just like Brad is saying, all of these things are laid out. Everybody knows that. You know that not only is it your job, it's your money, it's your freedom, all on the line if you screw this up. So you always err on the side of, hey, even to the point where you have to self-report your own security violation. And if you don't, that is a crime. So you walk into this space, you've got a closed system. Just like Brad said, you cannot get that thing off. If you put a thumb drive into the computer, assuming it still has a thumb drive port, here's what happens. An alert goes over to the person that runs that part of the computer system. Someone gets up and they walk over and the trouble starts right there. Like there's no denying any of this. It's all, you cannot have top secret leave. Because here's what happens when top secret leaves, and we're not even talking about secret. We're talking about the highest level, specially compartmentalized, so that you can't know someone's name or someone's source's name or what a special program or a special technology. It's protected because people's lives are at stake. And that's
precisely right.
Yeah, exactly. People die about this stuff. So here's the rule in the intelligence community. If that stuff, well, first off, we assume everything's compromised anyhow. If the stuff gets out of the system, one, there's a real problem. Someone's not following the rules. Two, it's all compromised. So if there's 70,000 documents, we're assuming that someone, now let me flip it, and I'm going to give it back to Brad. Brad, if I told you as a station chief that there is a super senior government leader in your area that is reckless with classification, and you have a chance to access that person's workspace by hiring in, or you have someone that already has a job there, Is that of interest to you as someone who processes information for the government?
Well, yes, of course, it would be of interest to me. I'm assuming what you're discussing about it would be, say, just for example, not pointing a finger, but just say, for example, that an ambassador in a country where I was working, a U.S. ambassador, was allowing classified information to escape his control. That would be of interest. It wouldn't be something where I would take direct action. That would be something to be reported up the chain, up the food chain, and let the big boys take care of that. Then they would. Those sorts of discussions, for example, would take place at a very senior level in Washington, D.C., not in that country between a chief of station and an ambassador. So, that would certainly be something I would look at.
Yeah. So as someone who's collected information, give me a sniff of that opportunity, and I'm going to stop everything. And I'm going to put all of my resources into exploiting that one thing because it may be temporary, but I'm going to do everything I can. I'll spend millions of dollars if I've got access to it. And like you said, Brad, it's going to get elevated above my level because it's really valuable to have access to that information. So,
yeah, if it's a foreign, if it's somebody who's being sloppy with information in that country, not an American, and I'm able to go after the information they're providing, like let's say the vice president of country X, where I'm the chief of station, and that guy's being sloppy with information. If I can collect all that up, we'll do that all day long. Absolutely.
I mean, that's a career-making operation.
It could be. Yeah, it could be. It would depend on what you get. But yeah, it would certainly not do you any harm, just no matter how you slice it. It would be something worth going after.
Yeah. So, and the reason why we take that aside is to say, this is not whataboutism. That is a significant event in the security of the United States. We don't know what's been compromised. We don't even know how many things were released or in the open because of this whole thing. And so then when we come all the way back to these investigations, if you can't get that part right, a cut and dry case where the person admits to it, and obviously it's a system, and look, if I work for Secretary Clinton and I have my clearance and I'm using it, I'm going to say, hey, I'll do whatever the boss needs. But I'm not pulling top secret out of the skiff without some kind of written guarantee that she's going to give me top cover because I'm not going to jail for this shit, And I don't know anybody at that level that wouldn't want that.
I agree. And two very important points out of all of this. One, all of those people that were apparently the ones doing the day-to-day mechanics of pulling classified information off of printing off classified information from a computer and then cutting it off, scanning it, and transferring it to the unclassified system. Those people apparently were all had a deal made with them by DOJ, and that was the famous case of where they were out, with hammers breaking their BlackBerries into little pieces to destroy the evidence. The other part of it is, and by the way, there are no ports on a classified computer. There's no thumb drive port. So, it's physically impossible to do it. The only way to get the classified information off is to print it. And they do that absolutely 100% purposefully. So you see who printed off what when. Case in point, you remember the case of Felicity Winter. She was somebody, a never Trumper who hated Trump, that was working as a contractor, had started out as Air Force, brought her clearance across, and was working for a contracting company. Saw something that she thought would damage Trump, printed it out and gave it to the press, who then ran with it and printed it. So that's how they tracked it down. I remember in the press reporting at the time that there had only been 3 people that printed it out. The other 2 were somewhere else doing something else, and she was the only one. And they immediately tracked it down to her, and she's still in jail to this day, I believe. Now, the final point out of all that's to me is absolutely fundamental and most important, and such a strong indicator of the depth of corruption, the political corruption that exists in Washington, D.C., is where is the damage assessment? Yeah. And you had just alluded to this. Where is it? They're required to do a damage assessment and have not. Now, in the early days of when Clinton was in the Secretary of State position, and this process would have begun if it was done as I'm suggesting out of all of this, there were a lot of things going on, like according to press reporting, the entire Chinese spy program, the CIA's penetrations of Chinese government and information and technical information were all wrapped up, and apparently roughly 30 people were pulled out of their desks, walked out the front door, and shot on the sidewalk in front of their buildings to make a point to everybody else, and another handful are in jail to this day. Well, there was also an Iranian missile technology guy that was arrested and ended up being shot. A lot of these sorts of things were taking place in that general time frame. Now, nobody can tell you for sure that those people weren't killed because of Hillary Clinton's leaking out of this information. And I think what this is in fact the origin of this whole Mueller investigation and the FISA warrant. If you just look at the facts, what fits the facts, kind of taking an Occam's razor look at this, what fits the facts is that Hillary Clinton had a real problem because she would have realized those names of all those people were included in these documents within this hypothesis, and that they all got killed. So she knew that she was on the stick for that and had to find a way out. So John Brennan was a close associate, a friend, somebody she knew, had some confidence in. He was a party loyalist who was in charge of the CIA at the time. So it looks like she went to him and said, I got a mess here. How do I fix this? And part of it is the reason I kind of suggest that as what has actually gone on is based on the timing. If you look back when the Steele dossier was created and paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign, thus indicating she's the origin of all of this, it was done before Trump was even the candidate for president for the Republican Party. Nobody thought he was even going to win the Republican nomination. So this was all prepared to target someone, whoever the Republican candidate was going to turn out to be, and they didn't think that person would win. Everybody thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. Most of the people I know thought that. So the only thing that fits the facts is that it originated with Hillary Clinton in order to cover her tracks for all these leaked documents that got people killed. That's the one solution that fits all of the facts. And this whole Mueller investigation, trying to get Trump and all of that, is a desperate, effort on the part of all of these people now at this point to cover tracks. And I think all of this latest thing with Ukraine is to cover tracks. I think the Mueller investigation was to cover tracks. And I think the great fear of these people and what's coming, that everybody knows is coming, is the final investigation coming out of DOJ, looking at all of this, the origins of the FISA warrant, and how all of this got started and kicked off. Now, Attorney General Barr has said multiple times that he's asked how all this got started. And the answers that he gets don't make any sense, and they're all conflict with each other. So clearly from the get-go, this whole thing smells bad, looks bad, and I think it's going to ultimately blow up in the face of the Democrats, and I think we're going to see people go to jail. I would even suggest more. I would suggest that some of this approaches the line of treason. And I also remind everybody that just the day after or 2 days after the Mueller investigation ended, Attorney General Barr put federal execution back on the table. So there is now the death penalty for federal criminal activity, federal crimes. Treason would be one of those. I think that was done with forethought and understanding of what was coming, because I think there's people here that have crossed the line. And I would certainly be looking at all of these names you and I have mentioned so far. And I would not be surprised. It may only be a ploy. It may be real. But I would not be surprised. And I guarantee you, none of these people, if they're guilty of all these things we're talking about, not a one of them is going to stand up to the threat of the death penalty. They're going to give them everything they know to have that taken off the table. So I think that was why that was put on the table originally by Barr, because he saw it coming.
Let me ask you this. You talked about a lot of this stuff weaving together. And and again, this is not whataboutism. This is a significant crime, right? And we have to take it like that. When I first became, got into the Army and was going to become a counterintelligence agent, the commander that I had, I don't remember who the person was, just a basic thing, but he came in and said, you're about to become counterintelligence agents. You're going to be federal, badged and credentialed people. Like, you've got a serious job. And you need to set your meter to being above reproach. And that means that, you don't put yourself in compromising situations. I know not everybody lives their life that way. I certainly don't live my life that way anymore. But when I had a clearance, I certainly did. What I wouldn't do is go onto the Attorney General's airplane in a private, unscheduled meeting, as a former president on the day my wife is being interviewed about this whole thing, and expect anybody to believe that, oh, they were just talking about kids. You don't put yourself in that situation, because I don't believe it. It's just like if you and I were to go walk around as intelligence professionals, forget that, as college kids in Iran and the hills, we're spies. When you go do spy shit, when you go do illegal shit, that's what it looks like. And my question to you is does this go all the way to the boss? And I'm not trying to throw President Obama under the bus, but when there's this much stuff and there's this much work to get out of the way of it, I have to feel like it's not unreasonable to say, how much was President Obama involved in this? How much did he know? Because here's what I'll tell you, as a guy that's worked in intel, we all have a sense for what is and isn't classified. And if it doesn't have a portion marking or a header like you talked about, that doesn't make it not classified. Again, that's you don't get to go, oh, because that's just not how this stuff works. You go, whoa, why is this on my desk? This has got president's intent in it. This is at least secret. And if not, I need to get up and go make sure, like, hey, this showed up on my desk. It's not portion marked. It's not classified as far as what I'm seeing, but this seems like this should be protected information. And you go to the person whose job literally is to say yes, no on these cases. And so, Brad, what are the odds that this actually touches the president and there's culpability? And a lot of this is done just to kind of like go, hey, let's protect the entire government. Let's not tear this thing down because of this one thing. Let's clean it up and then just kind of look the other way and say, not too many harms, not too many fouls, all is good, go forward.
Well, I think that's certainly the attitude that we've seen so far. I think that's State Department's attitude. There's just no question. They know the gravity of everything that was done. And I think the powers that be there, which ultimately has to rest with Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, who was a Trump appointment as Secretary of State. I just don't know how it must have gone to his level to be looked at, but they understand this. They know all these things you and I have talked about have been true. Whether it goes to the President of the United States, former President of the United States, Obama, I go back and forth. Now, previously, there were a lot of people looking at this, and the way they analyzed it was that Obama knew. And I would say that's kind of the most common conclusion out of this, that Obama was directly involved. Previous to that, to a recent statement by James Clapper, former head of national security, I would have said no. And the reason is because I think all this was spearheaded by Hillary Clinton. And now it would have been things that people would have bounced off Obama. But I do believe that the person driving the train, the impetus for all of this was Hillary Clinton. And she was acting through John Brennan. So say John Brennan everybody thought Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president of the United States. Everybody. And so he would have automatically kind of gone along with whatever she wanted. Plus, he's a believer in that, doing those sorts of things anyway. And, he would have looked at it and said, okay, 8 more years as director of the CIA. Great. I can keep doing all the stuff I'm doing. Now, at some point, that would have had to have been bounced off of Obama, and people would have been telling him. James Clapper came out in an interview, maybe a month ago now, and said everything they did was approved by President Obama. So I'm thinking that was more or less the way this was, and that Hillary Clinton was driving the bus, and yet Obama was informed of what was happening and who was doing what and why and all of that, and allowed it to go forward at the very least. So I would not be surprised if all this plays out in an honest fashion, which I don't think there's a guarantee of that yet, although it looks like it's going to go forward that way. If it does go forward in an honest fashion and the truth is brought out and the guilty are convicted, I don't think Obama will be directly involved. And that's the reason why, is that the orders didn't originate and come from him. He would have, said, yeah, okay, I know what you're doing, but, fine. And he closed his eyes to it. But I don't think that level of involvement to go after a president of the United States is sufficient. So I think Attorney General Barr, for example, would look at that situation and go, okay, well, we've got Hillary forward through everybody else that was involved, the John Brennans, the James Clapper, the Jim Comey, the FBI, CIA, NSC, all these guys are the type of people that were directly involved and therefore the ones that we're going to go after legally. Where Obama, I may be wrong. All this remains to be seen, but I just don't think that he was all that directly involved. Made aware, but not directly involved. So I think that'll be the line that's where the cutoff is. And I don't think that if this goes forward, they're going to look back at this and say, oh, no, President Obama ordered this from the get-go. It's his idea, all of those sorts of things. I don't think that's ever going to appear.
You know, it's funny. I mean, and this has been a great conversation because this is when people say "what about," it's just they don't know all of these things. Like, what about the systematic disregard for people's lives? You know,
yes.
Let's just, is that important to you? And if it's not, cool. Then we'll just go forward on that assumption. But all of these things, you know, when the government, and this is why I think as a nation, we're sort of leery of the CIA and the FBI having too much power. I mean, here's Comey, who clearly knows he has to go sit in front of the nation and lie to you and me. And maybe he doesn't lie to the Joe person and the person that loves Secretary Clinton, but he lied to you and I. We knew it. We heard him say, like, what? Like, how can this? How can I take you guys seriously if you're going to put people in jail for significantly less and call them traitors and everything else? I mean, I struggle with this mightily because, look, the president gets to make a lot of the rules. You know, like when President Trump, I forget who it was, maybe it was Jared Kushner. He's like, you've got a clearance. He gets to do that. He gets to go, yeah, give that guy whatever he needs. It helps me do my job. And then it becomes a political thing where, of course, he can do that. He's the boss. He holds the culpability of whatever happens. And even then he gets to go, so what? He's fired. He's out of here, whatever. So it does get weird at the presidential level. But, man, it's, again, as a collector, I would be licking my chops to get after representatives and senators because they're so desperate. I think I could exploit that stuff if I had nefarious intent or noble intent, depending on your point of view and which country you're from. But they just seem so exploitable, Brad, when they get into this position of trying to protect themselves. All I need is a crack and I can get in there and start to pull really high-end information out of that crack.
I agree, and these things just aren't ever looked at. Out of all this mess, I wouldn't be surprised if the House and Senate are kind of left alone, even if they're fairly guilty in having been involved in some of the aspects of this. I mean, just look at the track record on it. I mean, and you'll, speaking of licking your chops as an intelligence officer, you'll enjoy this one. You know, look what happened with Dianne Feinstein.
Oh my God.
Comes out of all of this?
To even bring it up.
Yeah,
I go
big
crazy.
Deal, but she has a guy who's her chief of staff out in California, who's been a spy for the Chinese for 20 years. Now, her husband, by the way, is a venture capitalist guy, and they've made several $100 million doing business with the Chinese, according to her own economic report that she has to do her accounting release on how much money they own and stuff. And so they've made hundreds of millions of dollars doing business with the Chinese, and it unfolds that this guy on her staff, her chief of staff for 20 years, is a Chinese spy. Now, her immediate reaction was, and by the way, the FBI went to her right away and said, hey, we believe that this guy's a spy. We know he's a spy for XYZ reasons. Now, in the Trump case, which you're required to do by law, and in the Trump case, if there was somebody on Trump's staff who was working with the Russians, they were also obligated by law to go to President Trump and tell him, and they did not. That's one of the other issues that's going to bite them in the rear when all this is said and done, if it all comes to the light of day. So this Chinese guy out there, Dianne Feinstein says, well, he didn't have any classified or access to classified information. He was out in California, where I don't keep classified information, but he was also her driver. So what do you do if you're sitting in the back seat of a car riding around, you make all your phone calls. So he's hearing all of this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
What's the other thing he does as your chief of office out there? What is she mainly doing in her office? And that is collecting money for the next election. So all of her donor information is in this guy's hands. So prove to me that some of those donors weren't sent to her by the Chinese government and that they weren't the ones financing her elections.
Yeah.
Prove that didn't happen. And if I were the Chinese intelligence officer running this, that would have been one of the very first things I would have done. The second thing I would have done is, damn well, a lot of the people that get hired into her office in D.C. originated in California, where she's a senator. And who would have put them in the pipeline to get those jobs? Her chief of staff out in California, the Chinese spy. So how many guys over a 20-year period, guys or gals, did that guy get jobs in Washington, D.C. that are also Chinese spies? And those guys would also spin off. It's kind of a musical chair things on the Hill. Those staff jobs are not super well paid. So a guy will go in as a staff position in one place. He'll get a little bit better job someplace else and go to it. And they all jump around. So he could have sent in 30, 40, 50 who knows how many Chinese spies into the system, and who knows how many offices those guys are working in now. Where is the damage assessment on this? And it's nowhere. Nobody's even talking about it. No, I haven't heard a single person mention it besides myself at all.
Yeah.
Where is it? I mean, how can this be allowed to stand as is? It's just unconscionable. It really is. National security has been flushed down the toilet.
Yeah, no, and listen, the Chinese have the biggest collection force in the world. I mean, everybody's tasked with something. Again, as someone looking to gather information, you're running an office bureau and you've got access to a senator because the driver's there. That's your baby. You're not going to put that person into a position where they're doing anything extra. You might exploit what's in the car, but if you're going to be the chief of staff and recommend people to hire, I'm going to work the shit out of that. And I am. I'm going to put as many people through the pipeline as I can, keep my baby protected, not put them through anything they don't need to go through. And I'm just going to sponge all of that stuff up. And then also, as I do that, I'm going to find other things that are exploitable with these people that are hired. When they have their character flaws, again, because they're not above reproach. And I'm going to be like, there's a point of leverage. There's an exploitable point. Here's these documents. Now I can go and start an operation in a completely different area because this one piece of information unlocks a whole new avenue. And this stuff spiderwebs out. I'm not telling Brad, I'm telling the audience. In a hurry. I just need access to information so I can get access to more information. And access is the key. If you've got placement and access, now it's just left to my creativity on how bad I fuck you every single time. So maybe nothing happened, but this guy here on this end who's collected stuff from evil people, let me tell you something. I'm not going to fail at that. I'm never going to quit, and I'm constantly going to work that system until that person's swinging from a noose, ultimately, because it's me against them, and I will get what I need out of that. That is my job. That's why I exist.
I would say there's zero chance that nothing happened. I mean, the Chinese intelligence service have professionally trained and experienced people, and you're not going to put your first tour junior officer in charge of a case like this one. It's going to be an experienced operator who knows how to exploit cases. And just think of it from that individual, the Chinese intelligence officer's perspective. He could have, in this pipeline we've been talking about, running agents through this pipeline into Washington, D.C. and let them spread out from there and then start reporting back to China. Talk about wanting to get a promotion. I mean, that would certainly do the trick for him. And look at some of the other aspects of this. So it's easy to manipulate once you're in that far. So, for example, this chief of staff, like I said, he's going to have his finger on all the donors and be talking to these people for the senator.
Yeah.
He's going to be the local contact for these people. So the husband, who's the venture capitalist guy who's making hundreds of millions of dollars, he has some company that's doing business, a form of business where the United States is pushing back against China on that. And so some U.S. aspect of that company here in the United States starts contributing money to Dianne Feinstein's campaign, large contributions there. She's naturally going to be friendly to them. The husband then starts being able to get a piece of that pie doing business and is able to make 10 or $20 million out of the deal. Again, you have a very friendly family operation where they're making millions of dollars, and Dianne Feinstein's getting money into her campaign. Now, what happens? That means China owns her vote, at least on that issue. They own her vote. So that would have been another thing. I guarantee you that would have got that intelligence officer, Chinese intelligence officer, promoted. And that's no-brainer stuff. This is junior officer level decisions to figure this stuff out. It doesn't take a lot of sophistication. Everybody involved on the Chinese end of it would have been talking about, okay, which one do we do first, not whether we do them or not. And the list would have been longer. There are a lot of other things that are far more sophisticated that could have been done successfully to manipulate the situation in the favor of the Chinese. And that includes starting to stretch out, going to other senators, maybe from California, and congressmen. All of that needs to be looked at. And I hate to be a broken record on this, but where is the damage assessment? Where is it? And it's not being done. And that's, again, and it's just,
let me ask
sad.
You this. Again, as a station chief, if one of your guys or one of your people came up to you and said, I have got the chief of staff who also drives the car for not just a senator, but a senior senator who I believe sits on the intelligence committee. Are you interested in that? Is there a sweeter prize than that? I don't think they get any sweeter other than maybe, someone inside the Oval Office with similar access.
Well, that would have had to, has to always, the way we're organized in the United States and the divisions between the different agencies, that has to end up in the arms of the FBI. So that would be the automatic thing. Me as chief of station, if I came across something like that where somehow I knew that there was a spy on the staff of a congressman or senator, the agency would have kind of washed its hands of it pretty quickly. They would have gotten everything we can get and just start turning it over as quickly as we can to the FBI. Probably the FBI has offices overseas too. They're the legal attaché office, LEGAT for short is what we call it. There would be FBI people there. Probably we would start at Washington, D.C., and word would come down. They would either send out a special TD wire to handle this, or they would have talked about their special agent in charge of the FBI office, the LEGAT's office, and maybe called him back to D.C. to talk about how to handle all this. And it would have been coordinated somehow in that fashion, but it would always end up in FBI hands from the get-go.
Yeah, and I guess the ultimate thing I'd want to illustrate with this for the audience is that this one person is so important to your adversary's efforts. There will be an entire staff hired out specifically. Like you said, they'll be TDY'd in. And if it continues to go, ultimately, they get permanently assigned. And there might be 20, 25, 30, there might be 100 people working on the opposite end of this thing, just focused on this one aspect because it's so valuable. You will spend millions of dollars in future retirement for your Chinese employees. There will be so many resources thrown at this as long as it's a viable operation. To just say, oh, nothing happened, it ignores how valuable this is. And then first off, how the fuck did this happen in the first place?
Well, that's an excellent question that in a damage assessment would be, revealed to us all how this whole thing got started. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the FBI for these sorts of things, something that high level, I mean, depending on what facts they start to see as they get into it, the question is not, can they get the resources to throw at the problem? I mean, they'll bring people from, they do this on big cases. They'll bring people in from other offices. If FBI headquarters can't take care of it, they'll automatically draw from the Washington Bureau office and start bringing in people from other offices, Philadelphia or wherever, and they'll draw them all in from Atlanta, out from the West Coast, LA, whatever they have to do. If they have to put together 500 people, I guarantee you the FBI is going to put together 500 people.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. Whatever it takes. And I literally mean whatever it takes. They're going to make it happen. And listen, Brad, this is a great conversation. One of my favorite Spy versus Spy episodes because we just got these realities for guys like us. This is what we want. We want these opportunities. We want there to be chaos in the senior level of the government so that we can gain access to these things as an adversary. Someone trying to even a friend. We'll just say Great Britain. They see this and they're like, oh, great, we can find more things out. Like everybody's collecting on everybody. And if you have chaos like this, it's not hard to find people to exploit whether it's passively or actively, and you can really change the outcome for your nation. Because you're right. How many votes do you need when there's something coming through the Congress, and the Chinese look around? They're like, okay, they're doing the same thing that Congress is doing. We have these 18 votes. How do we get the next 20 that we need to flip this thing from A to B? Like, that absolutely happens. It's statecraft, but what's the information system for statecraft? It's the CIA, it's the FBI, it's the Army CI, all of these things that give them the ability to find the assets to create the impact that they want with another nation.
Yeah, it's a funny game and dance out here all the time that's going on at the political level. I think the population in general of the United States of America understands that this is going all the time at some level, and that's why one of the most least trusted groups of people in the United States is Congress. Yeah, because they just see it. But the quirk out of all of this is most people like their local congressman or senator, but then they think that everybody else is guilty of all this stuff. But I think they all are.
Yeah. I always start with, well, vote your guy out. Take all your incumbents and vote them out. Well, but my guy's good. Okay.
And that's why we're in the mess we're in. And okay.
Seriously. Well, listen, Brad, we've done an hour, and it was, I don't know, I really enjoyed it, and I would love to have you come back on and do some more. You guys can find more about Brad at intelreform.org. intelreform.org. You can also link with Brad on LinkedIn. And what a great conversation from a guy that's done work in real life, not just someone who's written a book and theorized. This is a guy who's a tactician and knows how to get what he needs from the people in the field. So thanks, Brad, for coming on and sharing your story, at least, talking about these great stories.
Thank you. It's Americans for Intelligence Reform. We're on Facebook, YouTube, and certainly the website at intelreform.org. Thank you so much. It's great talking with you.